yourself a cold one.
They strike 'em, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of The College Draft.
Yeah, it's Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft Podcast, presented, of course, as always, by DraftKings. You guys know the deal. Use code Ross, whether you're playing best ball on the regular app or placing wagers, which you can do starting this week, by the way, for college football, week 0. We got a few games coming up this weekend, which is always exciting. Beyond fired up for this upcoming college football season. Couple things of note for this morning, right? Number one, we're not going to really dive that much into the week 0 games, in part because our guy Emory Hunt got called last minute to fill in all day for CBS on TV. And so, hey, this is what I did for a long time in the NFL, right? You always got to be ready. You always got to be prepared. And there is nobody better to have come in off the bench than Brett Whitefield. Check him out on social media at BG Whitefield, one of the co-owners and chief operating officer of Fantasy Points. He's one of the main guys behind the Fantasy Points data, which is incredible. Those of you that listen or watch youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, all of our different shows, so Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Fantasy Feast, College Draft, you have seen and or heard Brett multiple times already on the Fantasy Feast podcast. I don't know, Brett, have you been on College Draft Podcast before or no?
I think this is the first time. Normally I'm talking College Draft on the Fantasy Feast show, but this is the first time actually on the draft show.
I love it. Well, this makes sense because Brett is awesome. Really appreciate I guess we'll start with this, Brett. We've been able to see some of the rookie quarterbacks a little bit during preseason so far. You were the only guy I know that had J.J. McCarthy number 1. So unfortunate, that injury, because his only sample size, that first preseason game, I know Greg Cosell was saying on the Ross Tucker Football podcast that he felt like McCarthy had already made some major strides in terms of pocket movement, footwork, all those things. He looked good.
JJ looked awesome. It's sad. I was visibly upset when I got the news he was going to miss a season, just because that first preseason game was so good. Obviously, I believe in him, so I kind of expected that, right? So there was a big, oh man, that's a lot of weight off the chest to see him play well on an NFL field, and then now he's going to miss a season. So it's a little bit of a bummer. We got to wait to see the prognosis there, but hopefully next year is a big one for him.
I think so. I hope so. I would imagine that he'll be the number 1 guy starting out in the spring with OTAs and minicamp and all that stuff. I don't know when they were going to play him this year, but there's a lot of factors that go into that, right? How quickly they think he's their best option, how quickly they think he's ready to roll. Obviously, how Darnold plays is part of that as well. It's just, from Vikings perspective, that is rough. They let Kirk Cousins go. Now they're going with Darnold. We'll see what they can get done with him. But to not be able to pivot to your rookie quarterback at some point this year is especially unfortunate from a long-term planning perspective, which leads us, Brett, to the topic du jour, right? And I touched on a bunch of these guys last week with Trevor Sakema from PFF. He did a nice job on the show. And, next week we should be back to our regular rhythm and routine, which will be Emory making his picks against the spread in the biggest college football games every week, along with talking about the 2 or 3 prospects he thinks are most interesting in those exact games. But because week 0 is a pretty small slate, I kind of wanted to get one more opinion of someone I really respect like you, Brett, about these quarterbacks for the 2025 NFL draft class. And I guess I want to start holistically, and I don't know if you even look at it that way or not, but your thoughts on this year's or the 2025 draft class heading into this year compared to the 2024 draft class.
Yeah, so 2025, like I feel like we have a bunch of potential options of guys that could end up being the dude or, really highly touted prospects. It's a lot different than where we were at a year ago, though. We kind of knew Caleb Williams and Drake May were going to be in that mix. And obviously, J.J. McCarthy emerged. Michael Penix and Bo Nix continue building their resume. So we ended up with this really nice group. But it was kind of always set to be a strong group. I don't think right now anyone's super confident with where this QB group is at. I'm maybe a little more optimistic about some of these guys. But this class is desperate for a dude to step up. But I think there's probably 5 or 6 guys that I feel like all have a chance to really establish themselves as one of the guys or get into that, first overall pick range, so to speak. So definitely it's a polar opposite situation from where we were a year ago, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a bad class.
Was there a guy out of this group, Brett? And I'm looking at, I always look at some of the other people's, top 10 rankings or whatever, and you see some of the names that are out there. Was there a guy in this group that stood out to you as being, perhaps the best of the bunch, or was that not really the case? I don't know if somebody really popped to you like, oh, I love this guy or not.
There is one guy that I lean towards right now, but it's definitely a close race, I would say Shedeur Sanders is my guy right now. When I look at Shedeur's tape, I see a guy with just consistency in his lower half mechanics, and that's huge for me as a quarterback. I know when you brought me on to talk JJ and those guys, that was something I doted on with JJ, is he'd cleaned up a lot of those lower half mechanics. That just leads to consistent accuracy, and when I actually went through and charted a lot of these guys' ball location and throw for throw accuracy, and Shedeur, pretty handily stuck out as the top guy for me. But he does have flaws, right? So this is an interesting thing here. But I mean, Shedeur, I think he does a lot of the quarterback things I like to see. The one thing I think people will come back to is just a lot of what he does can be some improv, right? It's a little more improv-y than I think people would like. The offensive line's not very good, so he's sometimes he's a see it and throw it kind of guy, and he gets into that rut of where he has to wait for his guys to come wide open before he's pulling the trigger. There's plenty of tape of him not doing that, but it is this constant habit he kind of goes back to because that offensive line is kind of a sieve, and he has to live on the edge a little bit. But yeah, Shedeur is my guy right now. That he's probably the front runner to be my favorite QB in this draft.
Wow, that's interesting to hear. And I think everybody, I think last week, maybe Trevor, he had said he liked Connor Weigman from Texas A&M. I know, and maybe I think Emory was just talking about the SEC, but he was really high on Jalen Milroe and what he thinks he'll be by the end of the year. And I think that's fair as well. I'm curious to see what happens with Sanders moving forward. The improv thing is interesting because that can be both a positive and a negative, right?
Yeah, for sure. With Shedeur, where he kind of stands out is, even though he invites that chaos into his life, really great with ball security, right? Not a guy who is going to cough it up and put it on the turf. He doesn't throw a lot of interceptions, even doesn't put the ball in harm's way to be intercepted. So he's a very disciplined player from that perspective. Really tough guy too. He took some absolute shots last year, just standing in the pocket, delivering the ball downfield, taking shots, and just always got up, always played the next down. Really appreciate a lot of what he put on tape last year for sure.
You mentioned it's you felt like it was close, but he was the guy that you leaned towards. Was there a group of guys, or was there another guy that was sort of right there for you?
Yeah, so I kind of have a top 3, and then I've got another 3 that I think are in the mix for sure. My top 3, though, you mentioned Jalen Milroe from Alabama. He's another one, and similar to this past class, this is kind of like a pick your flavor with a lot of these quarterbacks. Like Jalen Milroe is polar opposite of pretty much any of the other guys in this class, where you're just betting on that extreme upside, right? Like he is a phenomenal runner of the football, just really, really creative runner. I think my biggest issue with Milroe and why I kind of like Shedeur a little bit more is just that pocket discipline wasn't really there. He hasn't quite figured out how to manipulate the pocket, how to step up, how to slide, how to reset that offensive line. Where I feel like Shedeur is a little more, he's progressed a little bit more in that area. So when Milroe kind of breaks the pocket to run, he's typically running. Now he does have some throws out of the pocket where they'll drop your jaw a little bit, but he's got to get a little more disciplined. I think this is a big year for him, right? If he can build on last year's tape, show a progression. One of the things that drove me kind of insane about him is I think I charted his time to throw this year to be like 3.45 seconds, which is like, 0.8 seconds higher than anybody else in this class. So he is typical for Alabama quarterbacks, slow trigger, right? Jalen Hurts did the same thing. Tua did the same thing. Mac Jones did the same thing. So it's something about that offense where it's just, see it and throw it kind of guy only. He's not really going to throw with anticipation. He's not really going to lead guys down the field open. So, but the physical profile, ton to work with. Really good arm talent's there. Creative second reaction type stuff. It's all there for Milroe. He just kind of has to build on last year's tape for sure.
So that's interesting because that's kind of the sense I get when people look at like Carson Beck and Shedeur and some of these guys. They're kind of like, yeah, he's good, but nobody seems like overly wowed or excited by their physical ability. Yet, conversely, the Milroe physical ability people are wowed by. He's just not where they'd like him to be in terms of knowing what's going on and always being able to, like you would say, get the ball on time and stuff.
Yeah, in Milroe, it's going to be like, at the end of the day, when I do my evaluation at the end of the season, it's going to be like how well he's doing those quarterback-centric things. Do I trust him to run an offense the way it's supposed to be run? Obviously, I had Caleb Williams was my number 2 QB in this last draft. Still scored really high for me. I think he would have been my number 1 QB a year ago. So it's right there for Milroe. He just has to do some of those things a little bit better, and I think he could get himself right to the top for sure.
I don't think you can do tickets any better than the Game Time app. I'm obsessed with this thing. The number one reason why I think everybody should get it on their phone is just to see everything that's in your area, right? So I'm looking right now. Wednesday, Bruce Springsteen, Citizens Bank Park. That is awesome. Then even like in October, Jelly Roll will be at the Wells Fargo Center. I got Pitbull this Saturday night here at Hershey Park Stadium near me, which is pretty awesome. I like to look and see how much the tickets are for the games I'm calling. $36 for the Eagles and the Vikings on Saturday's preseason game, the Eagles only home preseason game. What I say to people is take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code DRAFT for $20 off your first purchase. So terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code DRAFT for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Speaking of guarantees, I can't guarantee that Labatt Blue Light will be your favorite beer. I can guarantee it's my favorite light beer. Absolutely delicious. Love living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, so we got Shedeur Sanders. We've got Jalen Milroe. You said there's a group of 3 and then another group of 3. Who's the last of the top group of 3?
I'm going to go Georgia Carson Beck. I know you did mention him. There's limitations to his game. He's more of a pocket passer, but because he's more of a pocket passer, he does some of those QB-centric things at a high level. One of the things that really stood out to me was his ball location. He's definitely the most comfortable QB so far, throwing into tight windows, operating in those congested areas over the middle of the field. He's going to throw with a little anticipation. He's going to lead his receivers open. To me, that speaks volumes, and I know that Georgia offense is a little more pro-ready as well. He's actually making, a good amount of progressions. He's reading coverages a little bit, not at a super high level, but he's reading coverages a little bit. And he's got a pretty big arm. It's not like a knock your socks off amazing arm, but he can make all the throws. He can drive intermediate, deep, far hash throws. He can throw a sail concept from a far hash really, really well. That type of stuff I think the NFL will really like. He's got a little C.J. Stroud to his game, actually. Stroud obviously played in a much higher volume offense at Ohio State than Beck does at Georgia, but I just see a little similarity there where really like an arm that won't limit him, and then just getting through the pro-style concepts and delivering the ball from the pocket is really good. Now, he doesn't have a lot of creativity to his game, right? Not a big off-platform guy, not going to break the pocket and do a ton there with his legs. But for the most part, he's a really consistent pocket passer, and I think because of the level of competition in the SEC, what he's already put on tape last year, I do think he's got a chance to really elevate himself this year with another really strong year.
I'll be curious to see what he's like without Brock Bowers, although he had to do that for a bunch of games last year and sort of showed what he could do while Bowers was injured there at Georgia. I was impressed by him, watching him getting ready for that Georgia Vandy game. It also kind of felt like he played his best a lot of times in some of the situations where they needed him to. That's an interesting one. All right, then, so those are the top three. Then you got another group of three. Tell me about the next group of three and why there's sort of a drop off, if you will.
Yeah, so I got Quinn Ewers from Texas, Connor Weigman that you've already mentioned from A&M, and then I got a real dark horse guy in Jaxon Dart from Ole Miss. I'll start with Ewers. So Ewers, for me, when I watch him, you're gonna like accuracy, timing, and rhythm that he plays with. Like just he's gonna run the offense the way it's supposed to be run. The problem is the offense isn't super NFL friendly, right? It's like everything is an RPO tag. He's throwing backside slants off of RPO stuff. A lot of his best throws are those type of things. He's not a guy who's going to really wow you with so his throwing mechanics are kind of weird. He's got this almost sidearm shot put style throw, and he has to get a lot of air on it to get it up and down on intermediate and deep passes. And what ends up happening is the rhythm can be a little off there with those deep throws where you see a receiver just standing there waiting for the ball to come in. I don't think he's a guy who's going to play with a lot of zip. He reminds me, I hate to throw this guy out there as a comp, but like Nathan Peterman, like he's that style of quarterback. Maybe Gardner Minshew's a better example, where Gardner doesn't have a great arm, but he's still willing to attack downfield. Quinn Ewers just kind of reminds me of that. I don't think Quinn has a ton of arm strength, but that doesn't let him, prevent him from taking shots downfield and really attacking like too high looks and stuff like that. So the arm talent questions, though, I think that's going to be his biggest hurdle for really securing himself a top spot in the draft. Those throwing mechanics are super unorthodox. When he misses, it's obvious why he misses. It's lower half gets a little off. He's got that really weird shot put style delivery. And then the scheme just, it limits him a little bit. I do think there's a creative element to his game, though, that makes him a little sneaky. Kind of like Bo Nix has that. Bo Nix is a great thrower on the move. Quinn Ewers is as well. You can scheme some run game stuff for him. He's not a fantastic athlete, but he's really savvy, moving his feet, breaking the pocket. When he does decide to do the creative stuff, he's really good at it.
It's interesting as the guy that was the number one high school recruit and all that, and went, was able to go to Ohio State and then Texas. It's interesting that arm talent is an issue, because usually with the number one recruit like that, you wouldn't think that'd be the case.
A lot of people listening might even think that it's crazy I said that, because he does have some off-platform stuff. He's got a couple different like flicks and little things he can do with his arm, but it's mostly for short area throws. When he really tries to drive the ball down the field, that's, I think, when you see the arm talent issues there.
All right, then let's get to one of the other guys that you talked about as well. I'm curious about Weigman.
Yeah, Weigman is so the tape. There's just not a lot of tape on him. That's the biggest thing, right? In this very, very small sample, I think he only had 80 something dropbacks last year, right? So that very small sample, when you watch it, it pops. Like, this is a big dude with a massive arm, just an absolute cannon. Some underrated athleticism there. in that small sample, I did actually chart him as my most accurate quarterback last year, but the sample's really small, so I didn't include that in the Shadeur talk because I think Shadeur dropping back 480 times is more impressive than Connor's 80 something, right? So, but yeah, you see all the traits, right? Like if you're a traits guy and he's getting through some progressions, nice second reaction stuff. Like he kind of checks all the boxes in that small sample, so he's definitely has potential to be a big time riser here. Hopefully he starts, 12 plus games for them this year. So I think where he really needs to step up is maybe some of that design QB run stuff that they're going to do. Like he's not the best athlete. He's a big guy with a big arm, but he's not he didn't look comfortable running the football, if that makes sense, or even scrambling for that matter.
Got it. That's interesting though that you said absolute cannon, and then you also charted him as the most accurate guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty good combo there. If he can, like you said, keep that up for an entire season. What about Jaxon Dart from Ole Miss? He's had a really good career there. I like watching him play, but you don't hear about him as much as like an NFL prospect.
I think when you've seen some recent prospects like Sam Howell, Hendon Hooker, Drake May, even his 2022 film came under a lot of scrutiny because of the offense they played in. I think Dart's going to be in that conversation a lot. I think a year from now or I should say in the spring when we're talking about the draft, I think that's going to be his biggest criticism is that Ole Miss offense can be limiting and that it just, there's no real progressions. Everything's determined pre-snap for the most part. Even when you watch his tape, you don't see him go 1 to 2 to 3 and then deliver a strike. It's usually 1 and throw. There are a couple throws, but it's a pretty big sample to only have a couple throws of him getting to a second progression there. So, but you see accuracy in his throws, especially at the intermediate level. He really dominated the intermediate part of the field. Ole Miss will run some nice RPO glances, similar to how Texas does with Quinn, where he's just delivering strikes at the intermediate level. So I think that's a positive for him. Downfield accuracy is there as well. The way Ole Miss played last year with Dart at quarterback reminded me a little bit of what LSU was doing with Jaden Daniels, where it's just a lot of go balls. And Dart was very effective on those. Really throws a nice go ball. He's got enough arm to really push it out there. It's in time. It's accurate. I think when you combine a creative running ability with downfield accuracy, I think that's a very attractive skill set to the NFL. Now, the question is, can Dart progress? Can he get a little bit better this year? Can he, the offense will still be limiting to getting through progressions, but can he show some more second reaction throw type stuff where he's, making stuff happen with his legs, throwing the ball, when it's not his first read? I think that's going to be his biggest question mark. If he can do those things and sharpen that up a little bit, I personally think he should be right in the mix as a first round type QB.
Are there any other guys, Brett, that you really have your eye on this year, whether it's Riley Leonard now at Notre Dame or Cam Ward at Miami, maybe even Drew Aller at Penn State? Anybody else that you're really intrigued by coming into the year?
All those guys, I want to keep an eye on all of them because I do think they all have talent, right? The one you mentioned that really sticks out the most is Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. His Duke tape was fun. It was like there's not a ton of nuance to his passing right now. He's like a one-speed thrower. He throws absolute piss missiles, by the way. I mean, just rips them. And then he's a fantastic runner. Really big, long stride, strong kid, can just truck defensive backs in the open field. He can juke guys out. He's a really fun player. If he can kind of get better at just playing quarterback, I think that would be huge for him. But he's just kind of a big athlete right now with a monster arm. I got like a little bit of Cam Newton vibes when I watched him last year at Duke. I mean, he's just he's that physical presence. So he's the guy I'm watching. But all those guys you mentioned, they all have enough talent where it's like if they put out a really good season of tape, there's nothing stopping them from raising their draft stock.
Yeah, Aller is another guy that was a number 1 overall prospect that Penn State got, a 5-star guy. He definitely has a strong arm, and I've met him. He definitely looks the part. I mean, he is a big kid. We'll have to see, what he's able to get done this year. Second year in a row where he doesn't really have a ton around him at receiver,
right?
Unfortunately, compared to all these other guys in college football. Make sure you check him out on social media. He's the man for so many reasons. So glad to get him on this show. At BG Whitefield is how you want to follow Brett. You want data, you want fantasy, you want prospect breakdowns. Brett does it all for you. At BG Whitefield, fantasy points. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We're at Ross Tucker Pod. The keg is kicked. We are all tapped out.
Thanks for tuning in to College Draft. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and Fantasy Feast, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.